I'm waiting for two other board members to join, and once the other two board members join, or is it one? Yeah, I'm waiting for I'm waiting for one of the board member to join, and as soon as the other board member joins, then I will go official on the record. Okay.
Mr. Anderson?
Who's speaking? Please, Mr. O'Brien. Please, and also when you're speaking,
Mr.
please
Anderson?
identify yourself for the record. Yes, Mr. O'Brien.
Justin, can you hear me?
I can hear you just fine. Are you able to hear me?
Justin,
Yes, I hear you.
if you can, give me a thumbs up. Okay, I can't hear anybody.
We can hear you, Mr. O'Brien.
This is Justin. Can you hear me?
Mr. O'Brien, please mute your line. You can call in and join on the audio version, okay?
Mr. Chair, if you could.
Yes, Mr. O'Brien.
Thumbs up, please.
Well, we can't see you.
I
Do
can't
you
hear
have-
anybody.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I can hear you, Mr. O'Brien. I can't see you, but I can hear you.
That's Simone.
I think she might be waiting I think I've asked her to contact one of our other board members to see why he's unable to log on. So as soon as we get another board member on, Mr. O'Brien, I'm hoping that Ms. Andrews is able to help you. But I believe what you can also do is that I believe she provided you with a call-in information. And so if you I see your phone is muted. I'm sorry, I see your video is muted, but you can also use the call in to call in on your phone, so then you can hear through your phone. And again, I apologize for the delay, but we're waiting for another board member. I know that he probably was having some power issue, and so he'll be joining us shortly. And once we have the board member on, then we'll try to figure out how to make sure that Mr. O'Brien is also on. And Norm, we have been doing this these video WebEx meetings since COVID-19, and we have not had any problem. We have had hearings. We had our first hearing, I think 2 weeks ago. We have not had any problems. So today's our last meeting for the summer. And maybe because it's our last official meeting for the summer, maybe that's why we're having these technical issues. But as soon as our board member joins in, then we will start.
Steve O'Brien is on now.
Okay, yes, Mr. O'Brien, thanks. We're still waiting for our board member. So you don't have a video, right? Is that correct?
No, I have your video. Do you see me?
No, we can't see you, so you probably need to turn your video on.
I'm not sure why you can't see me because it shows I'm here.
Do you have a camera on your computer?
Yes. I see you.
Can anyone see Mr. O'Brien, or am I the only one that see? No one can see you, so. But so at least we know that you're there, but I can't see you, so.
You saw me earlier, correct?
No, we never saw you.
Oh,
We have always heard you, but we're fine. I'm fine. I'm fine. We can hear you, so I'm fine without a video. I'm just waiting for our other board member. So if you there's an indication on your computer or whatever device you're using that will tell you to turn your video on. But if is that did you press on that to share your video?
I don't see it. I see my initials. I see you. I see Mr. Cato. And I see Abra WebEx host.
Well, I'm not quite sure.
No, I'm not either. That's the problem.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure why we're not seeing your video, but we're there, and I'm trying to find out. I'm not quite sure why where's our other board member? I'm told he's supposed to join us by phone, but I don't see that he's on by phone. And since I know that he's available, we do have a quorum. I know that we have a quorum. Well, it's 10:44, and I think our board member is having some concerns. So if he joins in, then we will. So we're now on the record. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the regular scheduled meeting of the District of Columbia Alcoholic Beverage Control Board. Today is Wednesday, August 19th, 2020, and the time is approximately 10:44 a.m. This meeting has been conducted pursuant to guidance made available by the District of Columbia Office of Open Government regarding electronic meetings held by public bodies during the public health emergency. Pursuant to this guidance, notice of today's meetings was provided 48 hours in advance of the meeting on ABRA's website and on the district's central meeting calendar. The notice included the time, date, agenda, and call-in or log-in information for public participation. This electronic meeting is being hosted by a WebEx account provided by the District of Columbia government. Please address any questions or complaints to the OOG at opengovoffice@dc.gov. My name is Donovan Anderson, and I'm chairman of the board. I would like to introduce the other members of the board who are also participating electronically pursuant to Mayor's Order 2020-054. Please respond when I announce your name. Mr. James Short. Mr. Short, please I cannot hear you. Turn your microphone on. Mr. Short, please unmute. Yes, go ahead, Mr. Short.
Yes, Mr. James Short, present.
Thank you, Mr. Short. Mr. Bobby Cato.
Bobby Cato, present.
Ms. Rima Wahabzada.
Rima Wahabzada, present.
Ms. Rafi Crockett.
Rafi Crockett, present.
Ms. Jenny Henson.
Jenny Hansen, present.
The board has 6 members in attendance today for the conduct of business, and that constitute a quorum. Our first order of business is today, it's our calendar, and it's the fact-finding hearing by Rhino Investments LLC to be determined license number 99467. The request has been made from Rhino for a request to extend their safekeeping. And can we have the representative from Rhino introduce themselves for the record, starting with their attorney?
Stephen O'Brien.
Mr. O'Brien, good morning.
Good morning. And I think Justin Hicks, representing Rhino, is on the call also.
Yeah, good morning, Mr. Hicks. Mr. Hicks, you need to open your, we cannot hear you, Mr. Hicks, so you need to open your, we cannot hear you. Mr. Hicks. We can't hear you, Miss. I don't know what is it you did before, but we heard you before, but we can't hear you now. We cannot hear you, Mr. Hicks. We still can't hear you. What I suggest that you do, Mr. Hicks, why don't you sign off and sign back in, please? And board member Grandis has joined us. Mr. Grandis, can you introduce yourself for the record, please?
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Edward Grandis.
And good morning again, Mr. Grandis. So the board now has 7 members. All 7 members are here to participate in this meeting today. We're waiting for Mr. Hicks to come back on because he was having some technical issues. So as soon as Mr. Hicks comes back on, we will resume the hearing.
Are you able to hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you, Mr. Hicks.
Perfect.
Okay, good morning. Thank you. And while you're away, Mr. Hicks, Mr. Grandis has joined us. So we now have all 7 board members are participating. As you know, Mr. O'Brien, we had a request was made, I think, in November for a fact-finding hearing. We had a fact-finding hearing in November, and assurances were made to us by both Mr. Hicks and yourself in November, basically telling us that if the board approves the safekeeping request, if we grant the safekeeping request through March 31st, 2020, that the licensee would not come back to the board and request another. No, the licensee basically says that if by March 31st, 2020, if we don't have any license in transfer at that point, I will not seek another extension. That was a quote that was provided to us by Mr. Hicks at our last hearing in November of 2019. Our request is now being made for another safekeeping request. So maybe Mr. O'Brien, you can update us where we are and why is whether or not has that condition been met? And if it has not been met, why another safekeeping request has been made?
The answer is that condition has not been met.
You said it has or has not?
Has not.
Okay, go ahead. So
there is no transfer application to a specific location on file. That was the condition. It has not been met. I'll let Mr. Hicks speak to this more particularly, but long and short is that the health emergency has upset all apple carts. And that is generally speaking, the reason why, but I'll let Mr. Hicks elaborate.
Sure. Thank you for your time, Chairman and Chairwoman of the board. Yeah, we were, early in the year, we were close with many properties, and we were absolutely planning on being successful in this endeavor. As you know, the health emergency with COVID came along and upset everything. Since that time, we had to put everything on hold, as that business model, at least in our opinion, is not a viable one until there's some clarity and some stability in the market, and that there's a path forward to how we could open and operate, a tavern, both safely and profitably in Georgetown. We think that there's opportunity ahead as we get closer towards the vaccine and we get some clarity and the how these businesses will operate. As you well know, not just DC, but around the country, the bar and restaurant industry has been pretty much decimated. And And, while there may be people opening bars, I don't know. We are not in a position where we feel it's the right time to open one, but we do feel we're in the position that we've got the capital. We still maintain the determination and the will to open one. We think there'll be a rebuilding in Georgetown and other places around the country. The individual that I work for, the owner of Rhino Investments, is a Georgetown resident. He's got access to lots of capital and looks forward to rebuilding that area. So I think an extension will allow us to, seize upon an opportunity to open a business at the appropriate time, as there's, a little more clarity and stability, and be part of that rebuilding effort.
Do you have anything else you want to say, Mr. Hicks or Mr. O'Brien, before the board asks questions?
Yes. The issue, I think, at this point is whether any business can open with any prospect of success. Now, I don't have any statistics, but I'm very confident, I know at least from the workflow in our office, that the number of new applications for new licenses for on-premises consumption received by Abra since the emergency began is greatly diminished. I'm not saying there haven't been any, but they are much fewer and far between. No on-premise business is making money now. Everyone is losing money. The only issue is how much is each one losing. And in that climate, opening a business just doesn't make any sense. One other point I'd like to make, at the last fact-finding hearing, the chair observed that someone else ought to be given a chance to open a business if Rhino is not going to proceed. But I can assure you what's going to happen is if this license is made available and Abra makes a public announcement, there's now one tavern license available in Georgetown, a new business, I can assure you, is not going to come in and say, yes, we want it. What's going to happen is an existing CR business that perhaps is marginal with food service or doesn't want to fool with the quarterly reports anymore will come in and snatch it up. So there won't be new business opening in Georgetown. Just an existing business will convert its class. At this point, I suggest that the most prudent course of action is for us to await how the COVID-19 shakes out. Anything other than that at this point is, I don't think, ultimately going to be productive from the board's point of view.
Anything else? Any other, prior to the board asking questions, anything else you guys want to say?
No, we'll be glad to respond to board questions.
The first question that I have is that the representation was made in November, and the representation was made in November. It was that certain events would occur by March 31st. Yes, we're all aware that the pandemic, but the pandemic the public health emergency didn't occur until the latter part of March. So my position is that you had November, December, January, February, and March. And if you had told March, and if you came to the board and basically stated that we found a property, we signed a contract. However, based on the pandemic, we have to revisit our business model. So because we have to revisit our business model, we're not able to move forward. But you're not telling us that you have even signed a contract. you're basically bootstrapping by saying, you know, the pandemic, we now need to revisit our business model. And I understand that based on the pandemic, yes, everyone is revisiting this business model. But the presentation that was made today, you have not stated to me that we were at the juncture to sign a contract, to sign a lease. And so that this is what we were doing, and then the pandemic occurred, so therefore we have to pull back and revisit. I've not heard that, so I'm not quite sure. It doesn't appear to me that that anything has changed from the last time the last time you're in front of the board. And when you respond, the person who's responding, please identify yourself for the record, please.
Yes, this is Steve O'Brien responding, Mr. Chair. I would say two things. Number one, I would ask the board to note that Mr. Hicks just stated that earlier this year, he was getting very close on location. The second thing I would is, although the health emergency was not declared in the district until middle of March, in fact, everyone in the industry has known there was big trouble since at least mid-February.
Hold on, before you respond, could I ask all board members, if you're not speaking, to put your phone on mute? So if you're not speaking, please put your phone on mute, and then once you're about to speak, unmute yourself. Go ahead, respond. Whoever needs to respond, please go ahead. Were you done, Mr. O'Brien?
Yes, I had finished.
Do you have anything you want to ask Mr. Hicks?
No, just yes, up until into March, we were actively negotiating properties. While we did not have a contract executed, we had lots of LOIs, actions of property at that time. So we were, and I was leading that effort, very active with our real estate brokers, in trying to find a good location. Several properties, both on M and on Wisconsin, we were in price negotiations with, and an LOI stage, a later LOI stage, I should say.
Mr. O'Brien?
No, that's Mr. Grandis asking a question. Go ahead, Mr. Grandis.
Mr. O'Brien, it's good to see you. Would your client be willing to provide the board any of these LOIs that were that have been alleged to help us in understanding what exactly was happening regarding trying to find a location in Georgetown for CT?
And my concern there would be a maintenance of confidentiality. I would not have a problem, I think, in camera. For those non-lawyers, Mr. Grandis knows what I mean. Mr. Anderson does for the non-lawyers, meaning for the board to look at them, but they not be shared with the public. It's good business negotiation.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. O'Brien.
All right, do we have any other questions by the board members? Go ahead, Ms. Crockett. I see you. Go ahead.
Mr. Hicks, you stated that you were in active negotiations as late as March. Did you decide to cut off those negotiations because of your concern that, you know, opening a restaurant or tavern during this time would not be profitable? I mean, why did those negotiations stop? Was that at on your end? Was that at the other party's end? Why did those negotiations come to an end?
It was on our end, and I mean that was driven from I represent, you know, the person who owns Rhino. I work for him for another company called MC Dean. We're a government contractor, and I do all the investment for them as well. So it was not only just Rhino Investments, but MC Dean behind it, you know, who saw this, let's say, economic impact coming. So, you know, cash investments and investments across the board were put on hold company-wide, and that flowed down to these. And we decided that we needed to wait and see how this was going to impact the market. And since the pandemic, while we keep an eye on the market and see what's out there, we don't feel, as we mentioned before, it's the right time to open a tavern, despite the fact that we want to and we want to participate, going forward once there's a stability. But we were the initiator. To answer your question, we were the initiator of pulling out of those of LOIs, with the exception of one that got sold in March, despite we had a higher offer on.
Any other questions by any of the board members?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Mr. Short.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I would really like to enter on the record that because of this COVID-19 pandemic, nationwide trends have been to wait. I would like to also go on the record stating that I've heard our executives in most high places in the United States of America try to press things on as they're normal. This is not our normal. This is our new normal. I would like to think that this board would consider that this COVID-19 has caused a lot of businesses to make decisions that work for the public safety and work for their own pocket safety, and that this isn't the end of the line. And I would like to think that we make decisions based on this COVID-19 pandemic now, and just be reasonable. There's not a lot of businesses opening up now. There are, in fact, a lot of businesses closing down now. And I would like to think that once the COVID is gone, we would reconsider a lot of things that we cannot consider possibly now during the pandemic. Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Mr. Short. Do we have any questions by any other board members? All right. Hearing none, either Mr. Hicks or Mr. O'Brien, do you want to make any closing statements, please?
No, sir. This is O'Brien speaking. I'd simply be repeating what I already said.
Thank you, Mr. O'Brien. Mr. Hicks?
I as well. Just want to assure you of our, continued determination to do this. We do have an interest, and we certainly thank you for all the time in the past that you've given us, and hopefully going forward.
All right. Thank you, Mr. O'Brien. Thank you, Mr. Hicks. We'll bring this hearing to a close. The board will take this matter under advisement, and we will get back to you regarding our final determination. Thank you very much, and have a great day.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks. All right. We now move to our legal agenda, and the first matter on our legal agenda is to review and offer in compromise in lieu of a hearing regarding Penn Quarters Sports Tavern, license number 76039. The offer in compromise is that the District of Columbia, jointly with the licensee respondent, submits this offer in compromise OIC to the Alcohol Beverage Control Board as authorized by 23 DCMR section 1604.5 for approval by the board. The parties understand that if the board approves the OIC, this case will conclude and the scheduled show cause hearing will be vacated. Respondent will be obligated to abide by the terms of the OIC, a fine, suspension, both, or other terms shown below. If the board does not approve the OIC, the matter will be continued to the scheduled show cause hearing, which is not currently set. The respondent has been advised that there is no obligation to accept an OIC. Respondent has been advised through service of the notice of status hearing and show cause hearing that a show cause hearing respondent may be represented by legal counsel, have subpoenas issued to require the production of witnesses and evidence, produce witnesses and evidence, cross-examine witnesses, and apply to the board for a qualified interpreter. The terms of the OIC as followed. Charge 1, increased sidewalk cafe seating the statutory authorities, DC Code Section 25-762B2. The OIC is that for charge 1, there will be a warning. Is there a second?
Mr. Short, I second.
Mr. Short has seconded the motion. I will now take a roll call vote on the motion before us that has been properly seconded. Mr. Short.
Mr. Short, I agree.
Mr. Cato.
Bobby Cato, I agree.
Ms. Wahabzada.
Rima Wabzada, I agree.
Ms. Crockett. Ms. Crockett.
Ralphie Crockett, I agree.
Ms. Hanson.
Jenny Hansen, I agree.
Mr. Grandis.
Ed Grandis, I agree.
And Mr. Anderson, I agree. The OIC is accepted 7-0-0. Thank you. The next matter on our legal agenda, it's a review of a correspondence dated August 7th, 2020 from the Shepherd Park Citizens Association requesting that the ABC board schedule a show cause hearing to address alleged violations committed by Champion Kitchen. The matter is Champion Kitchen, license number 103055. It is my understanding that Ms. Jefferson from the Shepherd Park Citizens Association would like to address the board today. So I will ask Ms. Jefferson, can you please unmute your phone, and you are welcome to address this, bring this issue to the attention of the board. Ms. Jefferson?
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, Ms. Jefferson, I can hear you.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair Anderson and members of the ABC board. As he stated, my name is Naima Jefferson, and I'm the president of the Shepherd Park Citizens Association. I think I can safely state without offending any members of the board that our community's hope was that after participating in a series of new applicant and renewal protest hearings last year, we would at least have a year or two before appearing before the board again. Unfortunately, here we are where we are. It has been our community's hope that the Upper Georgia Avenue corridor bordering Silver Spring be a safe, healthy, and thriving corridor comprising of law-abiding businesses. That hope is best demonstrated when our association has participated in cleanups, plantings, as well as worked with businesses to promote them even throughout the COVID pandemic to keep these businesses alive and prosperous. The events that transpired that led to our board sending the August 7th letter should be a disappointment to us all at best. Our association had expressed concerns as to whether this establishment is in fact a restaurant on numerous occasions. As stated in our letter submitted to the board on August 7th, the record from the renewal hearing substantiated that the licensee had been notified numerous times about violations of the DC smoking exemption laws, the settlement agreement, and its license and settlement agreement relating to seating and the capacity of patrons in the establishment. In addition, there was an offer of compromise back in, I believe, 2019 regarding the seating and capacity as well. The events outlined in case report 19 CMP 00214, whereby one ABRA investigator informed the licensee twice about violations regarding the smoking exemption. This is in addition to the 3 cease and desist that were mentioned by the Department of Health, as well as the numerous evidence that was submitted on the record during the protest hearing. What this does is essentially establish that there appears to be an unwillingness for the licensee to comply with District of Columbia laws. This is particularly concerning during the public health emergency when eating at restaurants and bars have been cited by both Montgomery County and DC Health as an opportunity for community transmission of the COVID-19 virus. Our association's request is that the case be heard and that the license be revoked due to the aforementioned statements and circumstances. And I am open to any questions or comments from the board. Thank you.
All right, Ms. Jefferson, thank you for your comments regarding your concerns about Champion Kitchen and your desire that the board hold a show cause hearing. Please know that the board had case number 19 CMP 00214 scheduled for a status hearing on April 15th, 2020. and for a show cause hearing scheduled on June 10th, 2020. Unfortunately, due to the public health emergency, all of the board's hearings, not just Champion Kitchen, were continued to a date to be determined. It is the board's intention to resume status and show cause hearings in October. Until then, I'm referring your letter to the Enforcement Division to continue with its monitoring of the establishment and its investigation of any alleged violation. Thank you, Ms. Jefferson. We're not going to have any questions to ask you. You'd asked for an opportunity to address the board, and so we are affording you that opportunity. But the board, will forward this matter to enforcement for further action.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for participation today. Have a great day. Thank you very much, ma'am. All right, so let's continue on our legal agenda. And the next matter on our legal agenda is a review of the suspension of on-premise alcohol sales and consumption due to the public emergency notice of 6 emergency rulemaking. I make a motion that we approve this request. Is there a second?
Bobby Cato seconds.
Mr. Cato, a second. The motion will now have a roll call vote on the motion that has been properly seconded. Mr. Short.
Mr. Short, I agree.
Mr. Cato.
Mr. Cato, I agree.
Ms. Wabzada.
Rima Wabzada, I agree.
Ms. Crockett.
Rafi Crockett, I agree.
Ms. Henson.
Jenny Hansen, I agree.
Mr. Grandis.
Ed Grandis, I agree.
And Mr. Anderson, I agree. The matter therefore passes 7-0. The next matter on our agenda, it's a review of the addition of outdoor seating on public and private space notice of 3rd emergency rulemaking. I make a motion that we approve this request. Is there a second?
Mr. Short, I second.
Mr. Short has seconded the motion. We'll now have a roll call vote on the motion that has been properly seconded. Mr. Short.
Mr. Short, I agree.
Mr. Cato.
Bobby Cato, I agree.
Ms. Wabzada.
Rima Wabzada, I agree.
Ms. Crockett.
Rafi Crockett, I agree.
Ms. Hanson.
Jenny Hansen, I agree.
Mr. Grandis.
Ed Grandis, I agree.
And Mr. Anderson, I agree. That matter therefore passes 7-0. All right, so let's now move to our supplemental legal agenda. The first matter on our supplemental legal agenda is a review of the Second Amendment to Settlement Agreement dated August 15th, 2020 between ANC 6E and Cloakroom, license number 087875. I make a motion that we approve this request. Is there a second?
Ms. Crockett seconds.
Ms. Crockett, a second. The motion will now have a roll call vote on the motion that has been properly seconded. Mr. Short.
Mr. Short, I agree.
Mr. Cato.
I agree.
Ms. Wabzada.
Rima Wabzada, I agree.
Ms. Crockett.
Rafi Crockett, I agree.
Ms. Hanson.
Jenny Hansen, I agree.
Mr. Grandis.
Ed Grandis, I agree.
And Mr. Anderson, I agree. The matter therefore passed 7-0. We now move to our licensing agenda. The first matter on our licensing agenda is a review request to extend safekeeping of license for to be determined, formerly Gladys Nguyen's license number 114272. I make a motion that we approve this request through March 31st, 2021. Is there a second?
Ms. Crockett
Wabzada,
seconds.
second.
Ms. Crockett and Ms. Wabzada has seconded the motion. We will now have a roll call vote on the motion that has been properly seconded. Mr. Short.
Mr. Short, I agree.
Mr. Cato.
Bobby Cato, I agree.
Ms. Wabzada.
Rima Wabzada, I agree.
Ms. Crockett.
Rafi Crockett, I agree.
Ms. Hanson.
Jenny Hansen, I agree.
Mr. Grandis.
Ed Grandis, I agree.
And Mr. Anderson, I agree. The matter passes 7-0. The next matter on our license agenda, it's a review of application for a summer garden endorsement with 30 seats. The request has been made by Hellbender Brewing Company, license number 093500. I make a motion that we approve this request. Is there a second?
Ms. Crockett seconds.
Ms. Crockett has seconded the motion. We'll now have a roll call vote before us on the motion that's been properly seconded. Mr. Short,
Mr. Short, I agree.
Mr. Cato,
Cato, I agree.
Ms. Wahabzada,
Rima Wabzada, I agree.
Ms. Crockett,
Rafi Crockett, I agree.
Ms. Hanson,
Jenny Hansen, I agree.
Mr. Grandis,
Ed Grandis, I agree.
and Mr. Anderson. I agree. The matter passes 7-0. The next matter on our licensing agenda is the review request to correct approved license application to change 2 Summer Gardens to 1 sidewalk cafe with 87 seats after determined that the patio falls on public space. The request has been made by Swingers, license number 114545. I make a motion that we approve this request. Is there a second?
Ms. Crockett seconds.
Ms. Crockett has seconded the motion. We'll now have a roll call vote on the motion that has been properly seconded by Ms. Crockett. Mr. Short,
Mr. Short, I agree.
Mr. Cato,
Bobby Cato, I agree.
Ms. Wabzada,
Rima Wabzada, I agree.
Ms. Crockett,
Rafi Crockett, I agree.
Ms. Hanson,
Jenny Hansen, I agree.
Mr. Grandis,
Ed Grandis, I agree.
Mr. Anderson, I agree. The matter therefore passed 7-0. We now move to our supplemental licensing agenda. The first matter on our supplemental licensing agenda, it's the review application for stipulated license with letter of agency support to operate with new hours. The request has been made by Popella, license number 025084. I make a motion that we approve this request. Is there a second?
Mr. Short, I second.
Mr. Short has seconded the motion. We'll now have a roll call vote in the motion that has been properly seconded by Mr. Short. Mr. Short,
Mr. Short, I agree.
Mr. Cato,
Bobby Cato, I agree.
Ms. Wabzada,
Rima Wabzada, I agree.
Ms. Crockett,
Rafi Crockett, I agree.
Ms. Hanson,
Jenny Hansen, I agree.
Mr. Grandis,
Ed Grandis, I agree.
Mr. Anderson, I agree. The matter passes 7-0. The next matter is a review request and documentation to update premises address to 444 8th Street Northwest following expansion project. The request has been made by Cedar, license number 081157. I make a motion that we approve this request. Is there a second?
Ms. Crockett seconds.
Ms. Crockett has seconded the motion. We'll now have a roll call vote on the motion that is second. Mr. Short,
Mr. Short, I agree.
Mr. Cato,
Bobby Cato, I agree.
Ms. Wabzada,
Rima Wabzada, I agree.
Ms. Crockett,
Rafi Crockett, I agree.
Ms. Hanson,
Jenny Hansen, I agree.
Mr. Grandis, Mr. Grandis,
Ed Grandis, I agree.
Mr. Anderson, I agree. The matter passes 7-0. The next matter is a review request from wholesalers to be allowed to deliver alcoholic beverage shipments to the licensee while docked in DC waters at City Dock 0 Cameron Street, Alexandria, Virginia. The request is by regarding Tall Ship Providence, license number 113871. I make a motion that we approve this request. Is there a second?
Mr. Short, I second.
Mr. Short has seconded the motion. We'll now have a roll call vote on the motion. Mr. Short,
Mr. Short, I agree.
Mr. Cato,
Bobby Cato, I agree.
Ms. Wabzada,
Rima Wabzada, I agree.
Ms. Crockett,
Rafi Crockett, I agree.
Ms. Hanson,
Jenny Hansen, I agree.
Mr. Grandis,
Ed Grandis, I agree.
Mr. Anderson, I agree. The matter therefore passes 7-0. We now move to our cancellation agenda. The ABC board will be canceling the following license for the reasons outlined below. Milk Bar City Center DC, license number 098740. The licensee requests cancellation. I make a second. I'm sorry, I make a motion that we cancel this license. Is there a second? Mr. Grandis has second the motion. We'll have a roll call vote on the motion. Mr. Short,
Mr. Short, I agree.
Mr. Cato,
Cato, I agree.
Ms. Wabzada,
Rima Wabzada, I agree.
Ms. Crockett,
Rafi Crockett, I agree.
Ms. Hanson,
Jenny Hansen, I agree.
Mr. Grandis,
Ed Grandis, I agree.
Mr. Anderson, I agree. The matter therefore passed 7-0. The second request is again by Milk Bar Center DC. This is their caterer's license number 100825. The licensee requests cancellation. Is there a second?
Ms. Crockett seconds.
Ms. Crockett has seconded the motion. We'll now have a roll call vote on the motion. Mr. Short,
Mr. Short, I agree.
Mr. Cato,
Cato, I agree.
Ms. Wabzada,
Rima Wabzada, I agree.
Crockett,
Rafi Crockett, I agree.
Ms. Henson,
Jenny Hansen, I agree.
Mr. Grandis,
Ed Grandis, I agree.
Mr. Anderson, I agree. The matter passes 7-0. The next request is the Meet and Place, license number 074661. The licensee again requests cancellation. I make a motion that we cancel this license. Is there a second?
Ms. Crockett seconds.
Ms. Crockett has seconded the motion. We'll now have a roll call vote before the on the motion that has been properly seconded. Mr. Short,
Mr. Short, I agree.
Mr. Cato,
Cato, I agree.
Ms. Wabzada,
Rima Wabzada, I agree.
Ms. Crockett,
Rafi Crockett, I agree.
Ms. Henson,
Jenny Hansen, I agree.
Mr. Grandis,
Ed Grandis, I agree.
Mr. Anderson, I agree. The matter therefore passes 7-0. Thank you. We now move to our docket, and our docket is basically a request that's been made to make changes in a license that had already been issued or to issue a license. The first request is being made by City Corner Market, license number 116850. This is a new ABC license application. I make a motion that we approve this request. Is there a second?
Ms. Crockett seconds.
Ms. Crockett has seconded the motion. We'll now have a roll call vote on the motion that has been seconded. Mr. Short,
Mr. Short, I agree.
Mr. Cato,
Cato, I agree.
Ms. Wabzada,
Rima Wabzada, I agree.
Ms. Crockett,
Rafi Crockett, I agree.
Ms. Hanson,
Jenny Hansen, I agree.
Mr. Grandis,
Ed Grandis, I agree.
Mr. Anderson, I agree. The matter therefore passes 7-0. The next request is a request made by Matthew Gershon, license number 20 IMP 00017 for a personal import permit application. I make a motion that we grant this request. Is there a second?
Mr. Short, I second.
Mr. Short has seconded the motion. We'll now have a roll call vote on the motion. Mr. Short,
Mr. Short, I agree.
Mr. Cato,
Cato, I agree.
Ms. Wabzada,
Rima Wabzada, I agree.
Ms. Crockett,
Rafi Crockett, I agree.
and Ms. Henson.
Jenny Hansen, I agree.
Mr. Grandis,
Ed Grandis, I agree.
Mr. Anderson, I agree. The matter passes 7-0. The next matter is a request by Nathan Plumeau, license number 20 IMP 00018. This is also for personal importation permit application. I make a motion that we grant this request. Is there a second?
Rafi Crockett, I second.
Ms. Crockett has seconded the motion. We'll now have a roll call vote on the motion that's been properly second. Mr. Short,
Mr. Short, I agree.
Mr. Cato,
Cato, I agree.
Ms. Wabzada,
Rima Wabzada, I agree.
Ms. Crockett,
Crockett, I agree.
Ms. Henson,
Jenny Hansen, I agree.
Mr. Grandis,
Ed Grandis, I agree.
Mr. Anderson, I agree. The matter therefore passes 7-0. The next request is a request made by Cafe Deluxe, license number 941180 for a trade name change application. The new name will be Chef Goff's West End. I make a motion that we approve this request. Is there a second?
Mr. Short, I second.
Mr. Short, I second the motion. We'll now have a roll call vote on the motion that has been properly seconded by Mr. Short. Mr. Short.
Mr. Short, I agree.
Mr. Cato.
No, I agree.
Ms. Wahabzada.
Rima Wabzada, I agree.
Ms. Crockett.
Rafi Crockett, I agree.
Ms. Hanson.
Jenny Hansen, I agree.
Mr. Grandis.
Ed Grandis, I agree.
Mr. Anderson, I agree. The matter therefore passes 7-0. The next request is a request made by Prestige Beverage Group, license number 92845. It is a trade name application. The new name is Prestige Detroit Distributing Company. I make a motion that we approve this request. Is there a second?
Ms. Crockett seconds.
Ms. Crockett has seconded the motion. We'll now have a roll call vote. Mr. Short.
Mr. Short, I agree.
Mr. Cato.
I agree.
Ms. Wabzada.
Rima Wabzada, I agree.
Ms. Crockett.
Rafi Crockett, I agree.
Ms. Hanson.
Jenny Hansen, I agree.
Mr. Grandis.
Ed Grandis, I agree.
Mr. Anderson, I agree. The matter passes 7-0. Just for the public, if the public is going to participate, I have the next, I think, 10 applications are being made by Whole Foods to make some changes. So although they call them the same name, but they're different license numbers because they're making different changes. So we will vote on them individually. So the first request is by Whole Foods, license number 22045. It is a change of officer application to add J.P. Warren to the directory and as director and secretary. I make a motion that we approve this request. Is there a second?
Get Bobby Cato second.
Seconds.
Mr. Cato second the motion. I think I also heard that Ms. Crockett second the motion also. We'll now have a roll call vote. Mr. Short.
Mr. Short, I agree.
Mr. Cato.
Bobby Cato, I agree.
Ms. Wabzada.
Rima Wabzada, I agree.
Ms. Crockett.
Rafi Crockett, I agree.
Ms. Hanson.
Jenny Hansen, I agree.
Mr. Grandis.
Ed Grandis, I agree.
And Mr. Anderson, I agree. The matter passed 7-0. The next request is a request made by Whole Foods, license number 86069, for a change of officer application to add J.P. Warren as director and secretary. I make a motion that we approve this request. Is there a second?
Ms. Crockett seconds.
Ms. Crockett has seconded the motion. We'll have a roll call vote on the motion. Mr. Short.
Mr. Short, I agree.
Mr. Cato.
I agree.
Ms. Wabzada.
Rima Wabzada, I agree.
Ms. Crockett.
Rafi Crockett, I agree.
Ms. Hanson.
Jenny Hansen, I agree.
Mr. Grandis.
Ed Grandis, I agree.
Mr. Anderson, I agree. The matter passed 7-0. The next request is a request made by Whole Foods, license number 60167, change of officer application to add J.P. Warren as director and secretary. I make a motion that we approve this request. Is there a second?
Ms. Crockett seconds.
Ms. Crockett has seconded the motion. We'll now have a roll call vote. Mr. Short.
Mr. Short, I agree.
Mr. Cato.
Cato, I agree.
Ms. Wabzada.
Rima Wabzada, I agree.
Ms. Crockett.
Rafi Crockett, I agree.
Ms. Hanson.
Jenny Hansen, I agree.
Mr. Grandis.
Ed Grandis, I agree.
Mr. Anderson, I agree. The matter passes 7-0. The next request is a request made by Whole Foods, license number 86071, for a change of officer application to add J.P. Warren, director and secretary. I make a motion that we approve this request. Is there a second?
Ms.
Ed
Crockett
Grandis.
seconds.
both Miss Crockett and Mr. Grandis have seconded the motion. We will now have a roll call vote on the motion. Mr. Short,
Mr. Short, I agree.
Mr. Cato,
Bobby Cato, I agree.
Ms. Wabzada,
Rima Wabzada, I agree.
Ms. Crockett,
Rafi Crockett, I agree.
Ms. Hanson,
Jenny Hansen, I agree.
Mr. Grandis,
Ed Grandis, I agree.
Mr. Anderson, I agree. The matter passed 7-0. The next request is a request made by Whole Foods, license number 76139. Again, it's a change of officer application to add J.P. Warren as director and secretary. I make a motion that we approve this request. Is there a second?
Mr. Short, I
Mr. Short has seconded the motion. We'll now have a roll call vote on the motion. Mr. Short,
Mr. Short, I agree.
Mr. Cato,
Oh, I agree.
Ms. Wabzada,
Rima Wabzada, I agree.
Ms. Crockett,
Rafi Crockett, I agree.
Ms. Hanson,
Jenny Hansen, I agree.
Mr. Grandis,
Ed Grandis, I agree.
Mr. Anderson, I agree. The matter passes 7-0. The next matter is a request from, again, Whole Foods, license number 86073, for a change of officer application to add J.P. Warren as director and secretary. I make a motion to approve this request. Is there a second?
Ed Grandis, second.
Mr. Grandis has seconded the motion. We'll now have a roll call vote on the motion. Mr. Short,
Mr. Short, I agree.
Mr. Cato,
Bobby Cato, I agree.
Ms. Wabzada,
Rima Wabzada, I agree.
Ms. Crockett,
Rafi Crockett, I agree.
Ms. Henson,
Jenny Hansen, I agree.
Mr. Grandis,
Ed Grandis, I agree.
Mr. Anderson, I agree. The matter passed 7-0. The next matter is a request from Whole Foods, license number 86916. Again, it's a change of officer application to add J.P. Warren as director and secretary. I make a motion that we approve this request. Is there a second?
Ed Grandis, second.
Mr. Grandis and Ms. Crockett has seconded the motion. We'll now have a roll call vote before us on the motion. Mr. Short,
Mr. Short, I agree.
Mr. Cato,
No, I agree.
Ms. Wabzada,
Rima Wabzada, I agree.
Ms. Crockett,
Rafi Crockett, I agree.
Ms. Hanson,
Jenny Hansen, I agree.
Mr. Grandis,
Ed Grandis, I agree.
Mr. Anderson, I agree. The matter therefore passes 7-0. The next request is a request from Whole Foods, license number 86913, to change of officer application to add J.P. Warren as director and secretary. I make a motion that we approve this request. Is there a second?
Ed Grandis,
Mr. Grandis has seconded the motion. We'll now have a roll call vote on the motion. Mr. Short,
Mr. Short, I agree.
Mr. Cato,
Cato, I agree.
Ms. Wabzada,
Rima Wabzada, I agree.
Ms. Crockett,
Rafi Crockett, I agree.
Ms. Hanson,
Jenny Hansen, I agree.
Mr. Grandis,
Ed Grandis, I agree.
Mr. Anderson, I agree. The matter passes 7-0. The next request has been made by Whole Foods, license number 104498. This is a full-service grocery. Again, change of officer application to add J.P. Warren as director and secretary. I make a motion that we approve this request. Is there a second?
Ed Grandis. Oh,
Ms. Crockett and Mr. Grandis have seconded the motion. We'll now have a roll call vote on the motion. Mr. Short,
Mr. Short, I agree.
Mr. Cato,
Cato, I agree.
Ms. Wabzada,
Rima Wabzada, I agree.
Ms. Crockett,
Rafi Crockett, I agree.
Ms. Hanson,
Jenny Hansen, I agree.
Mr. Grandis,
Ed Grandis, I agree.
Mr. Anderson, I agree. The matter therefore passes 7-0. The next request is a request again from Whole Foods, license number 104505. This is the restaurant. Again, change of name, change of officer application to add J.P. Warren as director and secretary. I make a motion that we approve this request. Is there a second?
Mr. Short, I second.
Mr. Short, I second the motion. We'll now have a roll call vote on the motion. Mr. Short,
Mr. Short, I agree.
Mr. Cato,
Cato, I agree.
Ms. Wabzada,
Rima Wabzada, I agree.
Ms. Crockett,
Rafi Crockett, I agree.
Ms. Hanson,
Jenny Hansen, I agree.
Mr. Grandis,
Ed Grandis, I agree.
Mr. Anderson, I agree. The matter passes 7-0. The next matter is a request made by National Theater, license number 95684. This is a CX multi-purpose facility change officer application to add James L. Niederlander as a member. I make a motion that we approve this request. Is there a second?
Mr. Short, I,
Seconds.
Mr. Short has seconded the motion, and Ms. Crockett has also seconded the motion. We'll now have a roll call vote. Mr. Short,
Mr. Short, I,
Mr. Cato,
Agree.
Ms. Wabzada,
Rima Wabzada, I agree.
Ms. Hanson,
Jenny Hansen, I agree.
Mr. Grandis,
Ed Grandis, I agree.
Mr. Anderson, I agree. The
Ms.
matter passes.
Crockett, I agree.
I'm sorry, Ms. Crockett. Ms. Crockett, Ms. Crockett. And if you notice, there is I always call everyone's name in the same order.
I
So
know.
I apologize, Ms. Crockett. So Mr. Anderson agreed, and the matter passes 7-0. All right, the last matter on our docket is a request again from National Theater Group LLC, National Theater, license number 95684. It is to change officer application to add Nicholas G. Scandolis as a member. I make a motion that we approve this request. Is there a second?
Ms.
Ed
Crockett.
Grandis,
Ms. Crockett has seconded the motion along with Mr. Grandis. We will now have a roll call vote on the motion. Mr. Short,
Mr. Short, I agree.
Mr. Cato,
Bobby Cato, I agree.
Ms. Wabzada,
Rima Wabzada, I agree.
Ms. Crockett,
Rafi Crockett, I agree.
Ms. Hanson,
Jenny Hansen, I agree.
Mr. Grandis,
Ed Grandis, I agree.
Mr. Anderson, I agree. The matter passes 7-0. And we have finally come to all our end of our business for today. And if there are no other questions, I will now close the record officially. As chairperson of the Alcoholic Beverage Control Board for the District of Columbia, and in accordance with Title III, Chapter 405, Office of Open Government, I move that the ABC Board hold a closed meeting on September 16th, 2020 for the purpose of discussing and hearing reports concerning ongoing or planned investigations of alleged criminal or civil misconduct or violations of law or regulations, and seeking legal advice from our legal counsel on the board's investigative agenda, legal agenda, and licensing agenda for September 16th, 2020, as published in the DC Register on August 21st, 2020. Is there a second? Mr. Short has seconded the motion. We will now have a roll call vote on the motion that's been properly seconded. Mr. Short,
Mr. Short, I agree.
Mr. Cato,
Bobby Cato, I agree.
Ms. Wabzada,
Rima Wabzada, I agree.
Ms. Crockett,
Rafi Crockett, I agree.
Ms. Henson,
Jenny Hansen, I agree.
Mr. Grandis,
Ed Grandis, I agree.
Mr. Anderson, I agree. As it appears that the motion has passed 7-0, I hereby give notice that the ABC Board will hold this aforementioned closed meeting. Pursuant to the Open Meetings Act, notice will also be posted on the ABC Board bulletin board, placed on the electronic calendar and APRA's website, and published in the DC Register in as timely a manner as practical. As I stated before, this is the last scheduled formal meeting that we'll have for the summer. The board will reconvene on September 16th, and I want to wish all board members a pleasant summer, and we will see you on September 16 for our next hearing. Thank you very much and have a great day. Okay, thank you. And remember, I'll just leave that back. You know what you have to do, okay? Thank you.